Good day, everyone. I'm Janice Taylor. Welcome back to another week of Finding Faith Fridays. And what a week it's been. No matter where you are in the world today, I'm sure you're seeing uprisings, potentially protests, lots of division, lots of just hurt, anger, people crying out, shouting about their different faiths, some people coming together. It's just a big, giant mishmash. So I'm so grateful that you are here to join us today on Finding Faith Fridays. Today's topic is going to be around our beliefs, which is an interesting topic considering what's going on in the world right now. Most of what we do at AHA Healing is to really get to the core root of where someone is emotionally. Where we focus on is in the emotional and the spiritual. If you think of yourself, you're really four quadrants. You have four quadrants. You can just split yourself into four quarters. You've got one quarter here that is your physical, one over here that is your mental, that's of the head. Then you have your spiritual and emotional. Much of our world lives in these top two quadrants, physical and mental. These two are what we talk about. It's where people spend the most money, whether it's in your physical health and your fitness and looking good and all physical manifestations, things outside of ourselves, things like your house, all your belongings, that's all physical. Then your mental is really all what we think, where our thoughts are, how we perceive the world. But the emotional and the spiritual, we kind of take for granted, yet they are the most powerful forces that we have within ourselves. So here at AHA Healing, every single week, we dive into the connection of can you heal without faith? Now, how you define faith, that's not up to us. That's a personal reflection, choice, decision, study. But what we do say at AHA Healing, without the connection of the soul, the inner part of who you are, you cannot heal. And if you can take that as a truth and start to explore what your soul voice is, what is this inner knowing, this intuition that continues to beg your attention. But because our physical and our mental world is so loud and so busy, and technology just put it on steroids to a level that we're all quasi-numb to really even being able to have a rational conversation. It's like a whole bunch of people just got super high and are all shouting at the same time in the bottom of the pits of the Grand Canyon. And that has caused this overblown, disconnected, disenfranchised, lack of faith and mistrust of each other. So without any further ado, let's dive into today's class. As I mentioned, I am Janice Taylor, and I am the founder of AHA Healing. If you weren't here last week, just a little bit of a backstory to this. AHA actually is the root word of ahava. Ahava is the Hebrew word to give love. And when I first heard the word AHA, I heard it from my beloved super fan that I am of Oprah Winfrey. And when I was looking at her, she kept saying, have your aha moment, have your aha moment. And I was like, great, how do I have one? Like, where do I get it? Like, how do I order it up? I wanted to have one. I didn't know what an aha moment was, but for me, it felt like a breakthrough, like a crack in the manifold, a crack in that concrete. But at the time, I thought Oprah had said ahava. Now, this is the 80s. We didn't have Google. We certainly didn't know what that word meant. I was living in Saskatchewan, Canada, so it wasn't that I had the Hebrew language around me, but I heard the word and I was certain that it meant something. But it took another 20 years or so for me to actually go and look up and find out what that word actually meant. So here at AHA Healing, we believe that your AHA is the moment that you know without a shadow of a doubt that you are loved. But there's a process to get to for you to understand that. So this is a little bit about my background for those that weren't here last week. I've had a journey. My education roots are psychology. I studied psychology. I love my psychology roots. I'm back at Harvard in January to dive in even further in my studies. But I was just like a lot of people growing up in the 80s. I was your latchkey kid growing up with my mom. My dad was a confirmed addict without a doubt. And we were hungry like many people were in those days. Talk about inflation, it was pretty much through the roof. But I always felt this nagging sensation that my life maybe could be worth more than what I was seeing. I was seeing so much hurt, pain, addiction, poverty, but I still felt that maybe there was something bigger. I wasn't raised in a faith environment. My mother was very certain about that there would be no faith in the house. She once did believe in God. She did go to church, but her broken heart and the broken of my parents' marriage had her basically walk away from it all. But through all of this, I just felt that there had to be something leading me forward. So I spent 10 years in sports, music, and entertainment at the forefront of new technologies and living in Silicon Valley. So for me, I feel like I lived through what would be the prototypical idea of addiction, alcoholics, drug addicts. I'd been surrounded in that environment. I went into my psychology degree mostly to figure my own stuff out. Then I ended up in the pharmaceutical industry, so studying again, how is it that we are using these drugs specifically for certain symptoms? I wanted to understand that. So I spent 10 years, and then technology came onto the scene in 2009. And when that came onto the scene in 2009, I was horrified. I know lots of people were excited about the cell phones. They were excited about all of the things that we could do just in our back pocket. Facebook became a thing where I was in Canada, although I'd been other places for several years. But I was concerned about kids. So I quit my job, wrote Oprah Winfrey. 2 weeks later, I found my way to the show. And then from there, I started my tech journey. And I moved to Silicon Valley to just really get to the roots of it. And I was sitting in Facebook headquarters. Being from Canada, we had the opportunity to be chosen by our federal government to go and represent women in technology. I was there with that group. And I was sitting in all these different HQs from Apple to Google. And we were getting an introduction of like, oh, isn't this so amazing? And this is in 2012. And it was right from the transition from desktop to mobile. And I was sitting in this room noticing that there was just a few of us women, mostly all men, mostly all in their 20s, most of them white. And I was like, what is wrong with this picture? One part of me felt I had just arrived at a frat house and I was there for like geek beers. And another part of me was like, where are the adults? Like, if you know anything about, if you're a mom out there and even a dad know anything about 20-year-old men, it's not like they're building things always for the greater good. There's a lot of instant gratification. And me understanding what emotional pain was, I was particularly concerned. And so I put up my hand and I was like, what about kids? What about our social emotional learning? What about the fact that Pavlov walked away from this kind of experiments? Because guess what? They're inhumane. You're just building a Pavlov machine on steroids. Then you're going to feed it garbage. And then people are going to feel like garbage. And their emotional wounds are going to be further inflated. I knew it was the new heroin. And I was mortified. So that took me on quite a journey through the tech industry. During that time, I was still meeting with people and writing my own theory as to how people healed. So by day, I was running a tech company, and by night, I would host in a co-working space. I'd start to work with people on their healing journey. I wanted to understand what was really going on with all of us. And I came to this place, and this data is certainly backed up by it. Says 1 in 4 are really emotionally suffering. I'm going to gather that 99% of the world has some kind of emotional activation right now, that most of us are experiencing a bit of this silent suffering. And I call it a silent suffering because emotional woundedness is only obvious once there's a reaction. So once people react, then we say, oh, okay, emotional woundedness is here. Yet all of our decision making oftentimes is from our emotions. Yet we think we're making all these logic decisions that are all rational and reasonable. But you can't think that without actually looking at the other quadrants. Is this person connected to their soul? And is this person emotionally healed? And if those things aren't true, this does become true. So there's been many, many studies out here that have talked about what happens to children when they experience a wound. Now, when we talk about woundedness here at AHA Healing, we talk about it as a break in the spirit. Gabor Mate is another one that talks about it as a psychic wound. People have defined this wound in different ways, but they're all kind of saying the same thing. We include the category of time under the age of 10. So if you think about our life, we kind of run our life in decades, and you can kind of see that one decade can kind of serve as the pattern for the next decade. So when you experience this woundedness, I wanted to understand what happens. What happens when that ego beast gets turned on and we start to live and protect ourselves from that wound? That wound is in the child's psychology and in the spirit and in their emotions, a crack in the manifold. It's a crack like a lightning bolt. And we can't often avoid it. Even if you have the most perfect parents, we still cannot avoid that woundedness. And I started to think that maybe the wound was on purpose in some ways. Maybe that's how we start to come back to our soul and guide. Maybe this had to be the thing that had to happen in order for us to really decide to choose our soul and God and your spirit. And so when you look at the wound, there's something that happens immediately after. You need to imagine that from the wound, that break in the manifold, a thorn gets stuck there. Now, if you've ever had a sliver, they're annoying little buggers. Like sometimes you're like, I can't even see it, but I know I've got a sliver. Sometimes that can be your thorn. Sometimes it can be like, look at my gaping wound. I have a thorn here. Can we get this thorn out? There are different degrees. It doesn't make the thorn any less more potent, and it certainly doesn't make it less painful. It just means that you have a thorn. So what happens is we get the wound, then we get the thorn, and the thorn stays there and it gathers momentum over time. You need to think that the thorn gets pushed back into your subconscious. Maybe it becomes an abscess. Maybe it becomes a volcano that's just waiting to erupt. It is a frequency. It carries a frequency. Because where it enters the being at a child's development is most important. And this is something that we need to look at. So most of us are aware of Abraham Maslow. I'm a big, big fan. Oddly enough, Abraham Maslow died in Silicon Valley. That's not ironic enough for you. Literally, like died in Menlo Park, I think it was. Abraham Maslow is the father of humanistic psychology. And if you don't know anything about humanistic psychology, it's really the role of it is around empathy. He's really the father of this humanistic, empathic way that we can heal. And through empathy versus, say, cognitive behavioral therapy, through humanistic therapy, we can find empathy, not just for ourselves, but for others. And there's different degrees of empathy. I was really lucky when I did my degree. One of my professors was profoundly committed to the humanistic approach. And so I had a really good training when it came to that. But if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then sort of think about your life on a spectrum of ages, you have your physiological needs. Now, as a child, you can't really supply your physiological needs. You need someone to feed you and clothe you and take care of you until, of course, you're able to do that for yourself. But if you think about the first 10 years of your life, that's really just happening for you. And then just above that is your safety and security. Again, children can try to create safety and security for themselves, but it's really up to the family unit and the community to provide that. And as you move up, you come to love and belonging. Now, despite all of our wonderful parents' best intentions, even if they were cruel and abusive, they were lost in their woundedness and in their thorn. We can't prevent, in many cases, this woundedness that enters in love and belonging. You imagine that that's where the thorn comes in, right in the physiological safety, love and belonging. It doesn't really go much above that because it stays stuck there, which then impacts your self-esteem and your self-actualization and then your transcendence. That connection to the spirit and to the faith is interrupted by this thorn. Because after a period of time of a child experiencing their woundedness and their thorn, they start to doubt the world they're living in. They start to fear the world they're living in. It's just a natural response to emotional pain, and in many cases, physical pain and mental pain. But it's the emotional pain, that sense of love and belonging, is what gets disrupted the most. Now, here's the stick. It happens to everyone. Everyone on some level has a wounded thorn stuck in love and belonging. So what we did the last decade that completely fucked up so many people was we created social media groups and spaces to give us this false sense of love and belonging, as though that was really solving this emotional root. It didn't. It pacified it. It gave us the illusion that we finally found our tribe and our people, but it doesn't change the original wound. The original wound, what we call the big P, we have to pluck out the thorn so the root can lie back down. That's the only thing that ultimately allows you to heal this emotional pain. You can put stuff on top of it. You can numb and stuff it. You can do drugs and alcohol. You can become the most famous person in the world, and that thorn will still be here. It doesn't change no matter what physical things you put outside of your life. Because if you think of yourself in the 4 quadrants of self, changing your physical address in your house and the way you look will not impact a wound that is stuck in love and belonging. It's just a fact. It's not anything to shame and blame, other than to just say, hey, I've got a thorn and a wound, and it's stuck in love and belonging. And right now, this wound is inflamed, and this inflamed wound is burping, shitting, and farting all over my damn life. And I better get this thorn out, because otherwise I'm going to waste my time and my life trying to pacify this. And that's really the path of Ahava. So over a period of time, this pain gets pushed into the bottom of yourself. You go outwards in your 20s and your 30s, living your life, getting married, having kids, ignoring this pain that is still in the body, still there. The wound is still there. The thorn is still there. You've just pushed it, and it's always below the surface, and it grows. And if you imagine this bucket inside of yourself, like a soda pop can, you're just stuffing all that pain in there. And then all of a sudden something shakes it and boom, you open up the can and then it's spraying everywhere. Before you know it, you've driven into someone's iceberg that you don't even know that you did. You didn't even intentionally mean to hurt anybody, and you stepped on that pain iceberg. This is what we are doing every single day to human beings. And this is why it's a mess. And so when I was wanting to solve this, again, I say my roots, when I was a kid, I was 8 years old. I had my first drink. I was smoking cigarettes, 8 and 9. I'd go to school the following Monday after being at my dad's, surrounded by all of this, chaos, be hungover. And I started to really believe that I wasn't loved, that perhaps that what I was seeing that I deserved. As a little girl, I had no language or understanding. My mother was so broken by what was happening us that she just went into survival mode of like, we have to feed ourselves. We have to pay the bills. It was just this everything to survive. But I felt this sensation of like, maybe what I'm seeing isn't all there is. And by the time I was 8, I was into an Alateen. My mom was giving me books on Al-Anon and Alateen to read about what it meant to be a child of an addict. By the time I was 13 and 14, I was into addiction programs because I was told I had an 85% chance of becoming an addict. And again, everything was so fatalistic. I was like, wow, that really fucking sucks. So great. Now I'm an addict and I'm 13. Like, is my fate my dad's fate? I just rejected so much of what I was learning that I thought, what is the picture here? And at nighttime, the house was pretty empty. My sisters were teenagers, so they were gone. And I would go out the front door and I would take a little walk down the highway into the back sort of bush. And I would come into this baseball field called Kaplan Field. Kaplan Field was an old baseball field, an old timers baseball, probably some kind of beer league baseball. but they had an old scoreboard and you could climb up and shimmy your way up there. And I was sitting on the scoreboard and I was looking at the sky and the stars because I didn't want to be in the house by myself anymore. It was scary. I was 8, 9 years old. And so I was watching these baseball games sitting on the old scoreboard. And I started to think about the moon and then wondering where the sun went, because of course I'm a little girl and I have no idea, but the stars were so bright. I always liked the blackness of the sky, and then there could be all this light. And that was the start of my journey of going, maybe I'm not seeing the whole picture. And if I'm not seeing the whole picture, what is this other picture? But when you are in trauma, as some of you that are listening to this could be in trauma right now, could have experienced trauma, could be trying to forget your trauma, trying to make sense of your trauma, it's hard to think that your life has a different picture, that there's maybe more that you're not seeing. And that's very hard when we're in our pain. So I decided to really make this exact diagram that you're seeing right now to explain the fact that a human being really has two voices. You know, we have two hands, 2 arms, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 legs. In my case, I have 2 boobs. You know, if you think about all of the things of the halves that we have within ourselves, we have this opposite going on. We have a AA battery. If we look at a AA battery, it's got a positive end and a negative end. I thought, what if really our entire life is 2 voices? One, the voice of the ego. Everything's going to hell. This sucks. It's scary. It's dark. Fear-based, be afraid. But then I'd have this opposite, couldn't I? Because if I have the sun and the moon, I must well have an opposite voice within myself that's also saying, love, light, you are loved by your breath. This will make sense one day. All of that other part of the voice, couldn't that be going on at the exact same time? And when I was writing Ahava, this is what I really came up with, is that our first half of life, if you've ever read Richard Rohr, Falling Upward, great book, talks about this real sort of like we have to almost drudge through the dark so that we can cross the bridge and come into the light. But we can't do that as long as the wound and the thorn stays active. This section up here in the big P, that big P before your 10th birthday, we have to pluck it out. And what my real revelation came, I'd be like, no, I just take me to the end. Take me to my purpose now. Tell me everything that makes sense about it. Wasn't working. I'd gone to therapy, I went to Bali, I went to Alaska, and I still came to the conclusion that without connecting to my soul and understanding what faith was to me and to my soul, and to really look at these ingredients and these coordinates, I couldn't go directly to my purpose. I knew I had to climb up the flagpole, look back ever so slightly, collect this golden data, so that I could walk around the light side of the moon. Because here's the real truth. We learn how to stay in the dark from our family, who's also often in dark. They give us beliefs, which is what we're going to talk about today. They give us ideas. They tell us things, intended and not intended. They don't mean to hurt us, but they do. So we live a lot of our life in the dark until we hear the voice of the soul. And this is what's so beautiful about the soul and our faith, is that it's always leading us back home. I believe the most addictive part of our human experience right now, that is an epidemic, by the way, it is an epidemic. 5.4 billion people log on to social media every day and spend 1 to 2 hours every single day. That system is built on Pavlov behavior conditioning. Behavior conditioning is really built with a negative or positive reinforcements that conditions a behavior. I will give you a stimulus, you will stay here, rinse and repeat. Wrapped in all of that is something that we call here the codependent addiction. Now, most people think of codependency as people pleasing. That's not what it is. It's one part of it, which would make you a martyr. But we first learned about codependency, Melody Beattie. If you've ever heard of the book Codependent No More, it was really fabulous. It was a response to how do I live with an addict, but much of it was still about the addict. It wasn't necessarily about why am I in this relationship with an addict, born to or married to, and what is my response to the way that the wounds have made me respond to my life? And so if you think about that wound and the thorn, it creates a system of human addiction. How we respond to humans when there's emotion. So if you have any kind of emotion, positive or negative, you will bring this out. You will either be a martyr, a perpetrator, or a victim. These are three types of what we call the toxic triangulation. It's mostly people's response to emotion and when they feel their love and belonging is threatened. So if they want love and belonging, they will assume the position. So here's how it looks. A victim feels that the world is always kicking the crap out of them, being done to them in some regard. Like, oh, here I go again. Turn on the phone and it never works. Oh, here I go again. Here's another bad boyfriend or girlfriend. Oh, here I go again. They genuinely believe that they have no power to change their life. Now, a martyr, they're sensing that like flies to rice, like bees to honey, like, ooh, there's a victim that I can spend all my time focused on them so that I don't have to take care of my own feelings. So I'm going to people please and care give, and everybody else's needs are more important than mine. So I'm going to put myself on the stake, so to speak, and say, look at my sacrifice for all of you people who can't do it for yourselves. So that's a martyr. Perpetrator also is attracted to a victim because a victim likes the perpetrator's strength, and perpetrators can be chaos driven and they have no problem dropping a bomb and shit and saying, I don't know why you're all upset, martyrs and victims. Like, I'm just saying the truth. I'm the devil's advocate. And so what you find is that people respond to emotion, positive and negative, in very different ways, with the ultimate goal to have the delusion, of course, in this state, because you're addicted, is that you will have more love and belonging. If I just take care of everyone, I'm going to be loved. If I'm just, woe is me and people take care of me, that's how I'm shown love. Perpetrator. If I just bust stuff up and get people independent and all that, then they're going to know that I'm important. And so clouded in all of this are other things like narcissistic tendencies, etc. But it's important for you to understand this system because this is what is plaguing our society. And it is plaguing our society. The codependent triangle, in my mind, is the opposite of the Trinity. It is opposite of what we call at Ahava, the golden triangle. For every one triangle, there is the inverse of it. There is the opposite. It is a battery. So if this is the triangulation on this side of the moon, what is the triangulation on the light side of the moon? If this exists on the dark side of the moon, what exists on the light side of the moon? And so this whole piece of this started to look at what is happening in our world today. Like, we just have to take a look. We don't have faith in institutions, so church is kind of out the door for most people. Everyone's so busy, so going to church is just too much time. Well, if you spend, 2 to 3 hours a day on social media, you're probably not going to have a lot of time. Throw in work and kids and extra jobs and trying to survive and everything else that you're just so happy to binge watch Netflix by the time the weekend comes. Then who wants to get up and do that? But we've also had a disintegration of faith leaders. We've had a disintegration of all of our political institutions. Any leader, we're just taking them down. I'm sure people are Googling me right now. Hello. And every single time that someone steps into anything to provide something, we're ready to attack because we're stepping into people's triangulations. We're stepping into their protective stances of this complete defense mechanisms, flight or fight system, and it's activated 24/7 a day. And, the weapons of this, and again, we love Brené Brown, the weapons of codependency is shame and blame. The weapons of our wounded beings is shame and blame. So the moment that we're challenged to step out of our codependent triangle, we attack using shame. How dare you? You're pathetic. I saw your tweet from 5 years ago. Therefore, you are discredited. You shame them, you blame them, and then you don't have to look at yourself. Phew, you escaped it. So even if they said something that was in fact true that would allow you to go and heal, you don't want that. So we use shame and blame as our weapons. We will shame you to death and we will blame you to death so that is shrunk away and the defenses stay intact. And that's how the ego monster controls much of our life. So coming back to this idea that we are two systems, two voices, two opposite systems. One, the system of the ego, that wants you to be in darkness and fear all the time. Attack, 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 codependency. And the other, which is light, love, abundance of love, live in your golden triangle, look at the beauty of every single day. And where is the Trinity showing up for you? We have these two wars within the self. And then we put it into social media with other people. And then we put it into triangulation. And it really becomes this constant strain that most people end up feeling this tension. Here at AHA Healing, we transform pain. We move you from the dark side of the moon and teach you how to live on the light side of the moon. We tackle each of the systems. So if you didn't see last week's masterclass, please go and take a look at that. It was on the calling. So now that we know that everyone has a calling, what happens when you threaten something that people want to stay the same? And as we know from wonderful Freud or wonderful Einstein, was that doing the same thing, expecting a different result. We've used that quote a million times, but people don't really think about it for themselves, but yet it's really true. And so when I was designing AHA Healing, I wanted to look at all of the different theories. Although my education was psychology, I was interested in philosophy, interested in religious studies, even dabbled into Buddhism and some of the new age healing thought patterns. I wanted to look at all of it and to say, what are we all saying that is the same thing but differently? Is a philosopher saying what a psychologist is saying, just differently? Our egos want to have a semantic debate about everything. We want to intellectualize things to the point that you are debating it versus saying, hey, what do we have in common? When we go into a semantic debate, our egos are here and it's a fight to be right. I'm not interested in a fight to be right. Just not. Like, great. Where's the middle? Where's the gray? Where can we connect? And so when I was designing this theory, it was very much with that in mind. So I looked across lots of different components. As I mentioned, I've even been in the startup industry. I was like, what is the startup industry saying about healing? What do they have that could be applied to a human? I was looking at the wonderful game of baseball, which for me had to have been built by God because the Trinity is all over baseball. I wanted to look at all of these different pieces to put together this theory. So today we are on refusal. I looked at the Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey because it really, for me, was the best cadence. Every movie's been made to some degree using the hero's journey. I thought, what a beautiful cadence. Like, could it be true? Does every human have a calling? And does everyone immediately after you show them the calling experience the refusal, which is all these beliefs and defense mechanisms, which is the ego's device to say, not you. You're not changing your circumstances. You're going to stay right here exactly the same. And you're going to have the illusion that you're changing, but you're going to stay in fear and darkness where the ego is in charge. Whereas the soul is saying, let's bust it open. Let's look at all of this. Let's look at what happened to you from a completely different experience. And if you can look at what happened to you from a completely different experience, can you find your true self that's just yours? But the refusal is intense. So when we experience emotional pain, the moment we did, we immediately started to form a belief structure. That belief structure was like, no one's ever going to hurt me again. I'm going to be independent from this day forward. I'm going to stand up for everybody, no matter what they've done to protect my mom or dad. I'm going to do this. I don't believe in this. You form all these beliefs as a child to protect you from pain. You form them. You think that they're going to insulate you from never experience pain again. In the psychology of a child, you form these beliefs and you wrap them in concrete and you threw it to the bottom of yourself, hoping that no one would challenge that belief structure again, knock around it. So the moment that we do the calling and allow you to believe something else to be true, I've been doing this work a long time and it never fails. Whenever we're doing a calling session, someone will say, like, I don't write. Well, actually, I did write up until I was 7, but then my parents divorced and I never wrote again. Oh, I used to write in my journal all the time, but then my mom found my journal and then she showed my whole family and I felt so ashamed. I never wrote in it again. And so whatever the circumstance, when you get past this block, we see that when you buried your calling and decided to never be that person again, you buried it with a concrete block of beliefs. And beliefs are not something that can be changed with the head and with dialogue. They don't work. I can't convince you to believe this if your ego wants you to stay the same. If your ego has a hold of you and you want to stay in darkness and fear, there is nothing in the world that I can do to change that belief. And this is what I really studied a lot, because I thought, why is it? Why is it that we find it so hard to examine the beliefs that are given to us? We didn't form them. Most of our beliefs we were given to. And at some point as adults, we do need to examine whether these beliefs serve you today, the person you are today. It may have helped you a year ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago. That belief could have been very useful. But this is what I started to study, is that the beliefs that had you survive pain, please listen to this. The beliefs that you have created that survived pain most often are not the same beliefs and the toolbox you need in order to live in your soul and purpose. They are often the opposite. So if you've been killing yourself, working super hard, death gripping everything, perhaps you need to do the opposite, which is to surrender and to not grip anything and to allow light and love to come into your life without trying to control it. But the complexity of emotional pain as children creates all these systems. And just when you've opened one can of worms, another one is opening, or a lid is shutting, or a block is coming because you don't want to look at it. And these are called your defense mechanisms. Now, defense mechanisms often at the time, it's hard to say goodbye to them because in your mind, in your spirit, you think they prevented you and helped you survive. It's what made you a resilient kid. It's what made you survive pain. I swore as a little girl that I was never going to be in the position my mother was in again, which was when my dad left, we had nothing. He took everything. And I swore that I would never allow a man to ever put me in that position again, that I would be so fiercely independent that I would never share, that he would have his world and I would have mine. I was so terrified of that. Now, part of that belief structure is okay. I've been independent, but now with my husband who wants to take care of me at times, I'm like, no, I push it away. As opposed to saying some days it would be really nice if someone would take care of me. And I have someone that wants to, but because of my belief structure, I won't let that happen because I formed my belief as a child. Now, some of those beliefs are useful, but some of them we do need to examine. And we need to see where in our defense mechanisms, where in that belief is it blocking you from your soul? That's the ultimate question. Where is that belief blocking you from love, light, internal freedom, total peace, total joy? Not I have anxiety, depression, all these things that sits on top of that. Some of it may be true, but some of it may not be true. And this is why we have to take an internal walk with ourselves and look at this belief and say, does this belief serve you now? That's the question. You are an adult. If you were over the age of 18, you need to look at every single belief you've ever had and decide if that belief serves you now. Not what it did for you when you were 8, 7, 15. Does it serve you now to get you everything that your heart desires? This requires an examination, but we can't come at it with brute force. Certainly other human beings can't say, just change your beliefs. Why don't you just change your beliefs already? So all of that mumbo jumbo, no offense to the self-help world that are just like, oh, you just have to change your vibrational field. Oh, no, it's a far more complex system than that. You have to not just change your unlimited beliefs, you have to heal the wound. And if you can heal the wound and pluck out the thorn, then you can allow yourself some grace to examine each and every belief that haunts you. The hardest thing is to rectify in the human spirit is that the beliefs that served you to survive pain won't necessarily be the same beliefs that help you get to your purpose and love and light and your soul. We, in many cases, have to do the opposite. So these are some of the top defense mechanisms. And if you've experienced any of them, these are the top 10. These are very, very, very tricky. Intellectualization. So someone who's going to have a semantic debate over a belief that you have, that's somebody's defense mechanism. Like, look at me, Miss Smarty Pants. I'm going to challenge every one of these and semantic debate you out. I just have no fucking patience for that myself. So it's like, okay, if that helps you feel better, and if that gets you closer to what you want in your life, go for it. But I'm going to tell you that if it had you survive your pain, it won't serve you when it's time for you to have love and light. And every single one of these, in some ways, can be healthy forms, but they also can be overused muscles. And I love Rafa Nadal. He's one of my favorite tennis players. But if you look at Rafa Nadal, he's a left-handed player. So you see his one arm is like really big and his other arm's a little bit skinnier. And it's because you can tell he uses his left arm because he's a left-handed tennis player. You need to think about your beliefs in this way. You probably used a lot with your left hand, and you could have a really big muscle. But it's the ones on the other side of you that you really need to develop. And in many cases, you do have to say goodbye to a lot of these that really don't serve you. And when you're meeting someone and you're challenging someone on an idea, what you really come up against is people's defense mechanisms, because you're hitting the spot that's tender. And that spot that's tender, again, is the thorn, the wound, and the iceberg of pain underneath. And sitting on top of this is the concrete of their beliefs. So when we look at the origins of beliefs, we can look across sciences, art. This is why I love this quote so much. Religions, arts, and sciences are the branches of the same tree. Hallelujah, Einstein. Do you notice that much of these branches don't really speak to each other? So if you go to a psychologist for support, they don't necessarily speak to the pastor. And none of these branches really speak, but yet they all are part of the same tree. And I love this so much because every human being has a root story. We may be different trees growing in different countries with a different belief structure, but in our roots, we're all the same. We're all the same. And these aspirations are directed towards enabling a man's life, lifting it from its physical existence to your individual freedom. And I loved this so much because we so much want it to be just the one and only. Religion would say it's just these beliefs are the only ones. And arts are like, no, forget religion and forget science. We're in the art side of the world. And science is like, forget religion. I'm a diehard atheist. That always makes me laugh. Scientists are like, no, nothing exists over here. It's nonsensical. It's nonsensical because everyone in many cases are saying the same damn thing. But if you look at this from a psychology perspective, I am a big Viktor Frankl fan. I think logotherapy is one of the most beautiful, beautiful developments that he developed. And it's really an approach that helps people find their personal meaning in life. If we look at our lives right now, it's been full of consumption. So technology really between 2000 and 2010, and then 2010 to 2020. The first 20 years of this year has been, we got cell phones, we got social media, we got the ability to scroll and binge. Cable was gone. We didn't have to even wait through commercials. We went into a barf-orama of consume. If you've ever been into a hot dog eating contest, it's a lot of hot dogs, a lot of garbage. We just consumed. And we started to believe, because that's part of the illusion and the behavior conditioning of these machines, that your life maybe doesn't have meaning. And perhaps part of you believe that that's true, that our actual lives don't carry a calling, that we're just here to consume garbage and do selfies and put shit in our fucking face and then decide, like, I don't know, look at me in perpetuity. Like, just isn't going to work. The real thing about our lives, and this is where I believe that most of us need to be led to, is that everyone has a personal meaning in their life. We have a personal mission and a personal calling. But before we get there, we do endure suffering and hardship. But it's like, what do we do with that suffering and hardship to elevate the rest of humanity? What are you doing in your life with your suffering and your hardship to heal it and then lead other people to the meaning of their life? When I was a kid growing up in that neighborhood, seeing the shit I was seeing, you couldn't have told me that then, that my life had a meaning. You couldn't have told me then that suffering was going to be important. I wouldn't have believed you. But if you were an adult, we have to allow the possibility of something else. Have we not all consumed enough? Have we not all been led by the giant a-holes of the machines, of the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world that have put us in a big Pavlov machine and says, look at this, look at this, look at this, all taking you further and further and further away from you and your connection to your soul and your connection to your fellow man? You know, those machines exist only for us like a telephone book. Like, get what you need and get the hell out. But you don't sit there the whole time reading a telephone book. It's ridiculous. You lose your brain and your time, and it does get hacked. It's actually a proven hacking technique. And it's one that in psychology was shamed out of existence. Behavior conditioning, Pavlov, when you look at what he did to animals, like, look it up. It was terrible. He could change the nature of a dog. And so this is why coming back to this beliefs and allowing perhaps that your life carries a calling and you had to endure hardship and suffering in order to have the best training possible. I've worked with a lot of athletes over the years, and this is what I can tell you for certain. No athlete just wakes up being awesome. Not Kobe, not Michael Jordan. They did have to suffer. And their suffering could have been endless practicing and endless doubts and lots of personal hardships. But we only see the finished product. We don't often experience or even give any kind of respect that anything that we witness when someone is becoming great and their true self and giving meaning to their life, 99.9% of the time they went through hardship and suffering. And it was your hardship and suffering that was exactly the training ground that you need in order to bring training to your life. And that's how we transform pain into purpose. It isn't just for you to survive. I don't believe that. I believe you need to transform it, that this hardship and suffering that you are experiencing even right now is leading you to something that has something bigger than yourself. So, but when we think about beliefs, this was such a great definition. Trauma beliefs are cultural in many cases. They're family learned and they're reinforced by our friends. They're also reinforced because people then have child PTSD, which usually we know that when we're doing wrong, we can try to make ourselves act normal. But this kind of symptom fix is usually only temporary. Most of our world right now is in this symptom fix, symptom fix, symptom fix. I've met so many clients that are on tons of medications, diagnosed as ADHD. So every other person seems to be diagnosed with ADHD. Now, in some cases, yes, you may have the symptoms of that, and that medication can be a temporary fix. But if it is not connected to therapy, your soul, and the other quadrants of the self, you're not getting the full picture. These other pieces of the puzzle do need to be there. It can't just be, this is the box you fit in. Here's your diagnosis, go. But our culture is addicted to the temporary fix. Give me a quick hit, and away we go. Great, now I'm this person. I was looking on TikTok and people were even talking about the relationship styles, like, oh, he has anxiety disorder of blah, blah, blah. He has anxious attachment. I was just like, what in the shit? No, he has emotional pain. She has emotional pain. Yes, they have a wound. Let's pluck out the wound. And then you go to see, well, do I have the actual symptoms now? If you haven't been using your soul and the 4 quadrants of yourself to heal, I wouldn't buy anything quite yet. I would examine it. And this was all coming to my big epiphany. You know, I went through much of the therapeutic processes, cognitive behavioral. I looked at humanistic psychology, which I love. I looked at all different parts of therapy, meditation, yoga, you name it. I went through the gamut. And I realized that as long as these beliefs, this defense mechanisms exist in your being, and are in charge of your life, it's very difficult for you to heal. We need to examine them, surrender them, so that we can actually believe in something that we can't see. And I think that this is where religion is quite interesting, because much of the religions, all of the major ones, are asking us to believe in things that we cannot see. But I don't think that they really address that that's hard to do when someone is wounded with trauma and pain. And you may have got your woundedness and trauma and pain from church. So it's a double whammy of trying to look at a belief structure that will then allow you to use it to ultimately heal. And there's so much goodness in these books. There's much of them saying the same thing, albeit differently. So before anybody sends me messages about me being the Antichrist, let me just say that if Christianity works for you, by all means, find your soul and your faith path through that. But if it also works in another religion or another pathway, the more important part of it is not the tree, but the roots of the tree. And the roots of the tree are simply this: you have an ego voice and you have a soul voice. And that is unique to you. Your soul voice could be the voice of a Christian faith. And it could be the voice of a Mormon faith. It could be the voice of a Muslim faith. It could be the voice of a Jewish faith. We're not here to debate that here at AHA Healing. Say is that you do have a soul, and that soul does carry a calling. And your pain and your suffering is your playground and has been your preparation for that calling. And if we could examine that pain and that suffering, and we can shift those blocks and tear down that wall, we can form a new belief structure. We can form a belief structure that fits who we truly are. And so when we think about Aristotle as well with the philosophers, so religion, psychology, philosophy, they're all saying parts of the same thing. Aristotle says anytime T, our beliefs are wholly determined by what seems obvious to us at T, we can want to believe that P, but it's not obvious to us that P, then we will either reject P or suspend our judgment. So if it's not very clear to us at the moment, and if it doesn't match our pain story, we will reject a lot of beliefs because they don't fit the story that we've married ourselves to. If you have married to the story that your father was the worst human being in the world, and you believe it to be true because you saw his behavior, and now you know that T equals P, and then that's bad. And as a result of that, you formed a belief that you will never trust men again. You formed a belief on a part of a truth, not the full truth. And that belief may or may not serve you now that the pain is over. And this is why I love Eckhart Tolle that says, if you look at your pain situation, you're not necessarily in danger in this exact moment, but we bring our pain situation alive every moment that we challenge our beliefs. And our pain story comes back in, like, how dare you ask me to forgive my father? How dare you ask me to see him in a different light so that I can have the freedom to love the man that wants to love me? But if you still are tied to your wounded state, you'll be tied to your belief. And if you're tied to your belief, then your belief may not serve you now. And that's ultimately what they're all saying. And when we form a belief, that belief story is most often wrapped into one of these roles, which is our cycle of negativity. We have a belief that the world is always happening to us, and therefore we have no choice. Victim. Martyr. You have a belief that you think that you are in charge and can control how other people feel by making sure you take care of everything. Perpetrator. You have a belief that if you go and you challenge everyone on their beliefs, that they'll suddenly change their mind. This roles of negativity is what debilitates us. And this is what we drive into when we hit the big brick wall. So here at AHA Healing, we do your golden triangle. You are a third of what your mother believed, and you are a third of what your father believed, and you are a third just designed for you. And until we can examine the beliefs that we learned as children in trauma and decide if they fit the third of you now, that they did and what they did, you are the third part. And if you are an adult, you can ask the question, does this serve you now? That's the question. Does it serve you now? So we wanted to make a process. We wanted to welcome love. We wanted you to say goodbye. We knew that you would be in refusal. We looked at all parts of the self, loved Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey for this, and we designed a process. We work with all kinds of people at all stages. I've worked as young as 14-year-olds to as old as 65, to those that are married, to those that are single, to couples together, to families. This process works because we get to the heart of the woundedness. And all of that led to this epiphany. And I'm going to leave you with this quote today as we wrap up our last 5 minutes together. And I hope you've enjoyed this lecture masterclass on beliefs and where they're formed and how they're formed and why it's okay to challenge them today. I'd learned as I started to do a faith walk in my 30s, having not been raised in faith, that I loved this quote. It says, "Have faith like never before. If God is in control, there are no mistakes. Fear not" is listed 365 times in the Bible, one for each day. So even if you are in trauma right now, fear not, for the soul is here and it's beckoning your name. If you are in trauma or have experienced trauma, that suffering may have been your preparation for your calling. It's okay to say goodbye to beliefs that no longer serve you. It's okay to say goodbye to them. It's okay to love and bless them because they helped you get through pain. But like all things, beliefs are something we need to mourn and we need to say goodbye to. It's okay to say goodbye to them, even if your little girl, little guy in there doesn't want to because they think that the world is going to fall apart if they let this go. The world will not fall apart if you let this go. It will be new. It will be new, but fear not. These are the books that we're reading this week. I would love for you to get my book, of course. And this book is The Primal Wound. I loved this book because it really took humanistic psychology, where Abraham Maslow left off, went into transpersonal psychology, and it really talked about the wound and how the wound is formed. It's a beautiful book that describes what happens to you inside. And if I feel that if you can have the theory, you can play the piano. My mother was a piano teacher. She'd say, you can't play the piano without learning the notes. We hope that every single master class, this is an opportunity for you to learn the notes. If you accept a limiting belief in yourself, then it will become a truth for you. It will be a truth for you, but it doesn't have to stay a truth for you. So next week, we're going to dive into shedding into grief. And if you'd like to get started today on learning the map, here you can head to our website, www.ahacourses.com, personal healing. We have a beautiful special going on right now that allows you to start to learn all of the pieces of this theory, to really start to dive into the self, to take this internal walk. It is our map. Now, we're going to see if there are any questions that we would like to have, as well as also coming back here. So next week, within the phases of Ahava, is going to be the love and acceptance on here. And it's really going to be diving into shedding and into grief. Much of our beliefs are something that we have to say goodbye to. So this weekend, here is a little tip. I'm going to just roll through these. So here's the tip. I want you to make a list, just a simple, get a cup of coffee, put some music on. I'd love for you to make a little list. Make a list of every belief that you believe right now potentially is holding you back. Something that is keeping you from what you really want. Just think about it. It could be something simple like, I don't believe that love exists. That's the belief. Now, if that's your belief, it's okay. I'd like you to spend the weekend just barfing out, writing out, stream of consciousness writing, everything that you think about that belief. Just barf it out. Automatic write, don't backspace. Come to a place and ask yourself, does this serve you now? Does this belief serve you now? That's the question. If you want love and you don't believe that love is possible, you're disconnected from what you want to what you believe. But the only way that we can say goodbye to that belief is we have to allow you the opportunity to say why you don't believe in love. What broke your heart? What made you believe that this was not possible? You need to just barf it out and give it voice. Bring it into the light so that you can say, I didn't believe it at the time and it may have protected me. But to go forward in my life, it's time to say goodbye. Beliefs are just old shoes. A lot of times that we need to kick off and say, thank you for walking this mile with me, but it's now time to say goodbye. And this is where I leave you. Have a great Thanksgiving weekend. We will see you next week when we talk about shedding. Bye for now.